So,
Hi.
we meet again.
Yes.
Last we talked, the two of you were running for council.
Yeah.
You both won. And now we got an open mayoral seat.
Yep.
Who wants to go first on why the hell you want to do this? And you only get 2 years, right?
Absolutely. Well, 2 years first time. We can have 4 2-year terms.
Yeah, right, I understand, but you gotta, this means you have to run every 2 years instead of every 4 years.
That's true.
Okay, you wanna start, Cheryl? Why do you wanna do this?
You know,
And let's keep it policy, like last time, I don't remember, my little shtick about, let's keep it really policy focused and,
well, of course. Of course. My passion is government. I've been doing this since I was in high school in some manner or form. I've been connected at federal and state and local level. As you know, in 2006 I was recruited to run. I think because there were no women running and they wanted another voice to give some kind of alternative to what was out there. And I was fortunate enough to win. I think I've been very courageous in some of the positions that I've taken in terms of doing what I believe is right for all of Pleasanton. I think one of the biggest issues in the next 8 years or so, 2 to 8 years, we'll say, is leadership and our relationship with those people around us. I think that we need to make sure that Pleasanton gets what it deserves in terms of attention and money, but we also need to learn to work with others around us. And I'm speaking specifically with County Board of Supervisors in regards to money for transportation issues, mainly State Route 84. And we've been put at the bottom of that queue over and over again. And I think that we need to foster some positive relationships so we can get that built, as well as, El Charro from I-580 to Stanley. Certainly the kind of transportation money that we're going to need in the next decade is going to come from the county. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I'm all ears. Transportation number one.
Okay, transportation.
I hear, yeah,
Okay.
I'm all ears.
One of the things
sounds like a policy issue to me.
Yes, okay, good. Well, and I do have
For the policy wonk here, that makes me happy just to hear policy
okay,
issues.
well, and I've got things in writing, and I also have a press release for you. The other thing that I think is extremely important, and one of the things I ran on in 2006, so we see a theme here, right, is that the affordable housing. One of the things that got us in trouble in terms of the state was this imbalance between the number of jobs we have and the number of housing units. And we know that it's beneficial to the quality of the community when you have someone living close enough to homes that they can participate in their child's soccer game, they can volunteer for the community, they can participate in the many kinds of recreational amenities that we have in Pleasanton. And we don't have any, we have very little of a certain type of housing stock. And when I was on the Housing Element Task Force, one of the things that I asked that they do is insert a page that expressly addressed the kind of people that would use this type of housing, because I think that people think affordable housing, they think tenements in Chicago, when in fact, a moderately low income is 80% of the average, and the average in Pleasanton is $78,000 and change. That's not somebody who's on food stamps, and it's not somebody who's Section 8 housing.
So you're saying average $60,000 incomes?
Something, yeah,
Okay.
$65,000 for moderately low.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases in Pleasanton, our market rate housing was actually less than the moderately low over at Civic Center Apartments.
Okay, let me ask you a question
Mm-hmm.
here. Last I recall, you guys had lost the lawsuit with the state. I'm trying to remember whether you guys settled out of court or
No, we lost.
You lost in court,
yeah.
right? Okay.
To the tune of $1.9 million.
And it was really clear you guys had to start dealing with more affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
What have you actually done in terms of steps since then to address the court order?
We have rezoned 70 acres.
Okay.
For high density. But to go back a little bit, that's one of the issues I think is really important, is that that we had set ourselves up for that lawsuit.
Right.
I mean, we had put in place a hard housing cap. We didn't do anything to adjust it. We did nothing to rezone mixed use, even though we said we'd do it in 2004, 2006, 2008. We lost the lawsuit, and the thing that you hear referred to as the settlement agreement was actually our attempt to get some more local control back in terms of how that housing would look and where it would go. And so the 70 acres, I am gonna let you talk in just a second. The 70 acres.
Don't worry, he's gonna get equal
Okay,
time, believe me.
Okay, the 70 acres that we have rezoned, we spent about a year trying to figure out what that would look like, and it's placed throughout the community. It's not in one location.
Okay, Jerry, you wanna go?
Yeah, to answer that question, I think I have to go back and give you a little bit of the background and history. I actually started getting involved in government back in the 1980s when I worked with the California Manufacturers Association and the American Electronics Association to help deal with some of the environmental issues that were coming through the state legislature. I think at one point in time there were about 2,000 bills in the state legislature that had something to do with the environment. I helped craft the Berry Tank ordinance that's currently being used, and what we used to call the H6 occupancy, which is dealing with all the things that have to be done when you use toxic gases. So that's what got me interested in politics. What got me interested in local politics was my daughter was a U.S. swimmer, and we only had the Amador pool, so I went through a 7-year process of getting a 50-meter pool built over at Amador, and I just, not Amador, but over at the Aquatic Center. And that kind of got me interested because it just dawned on me that I can get more done locally than I can at the state, just by the efforts that I put into it. So I got on the Park and Recreation Commission. I spent 10 years there, and I led a number of task forces in 180 for parks around town. I like the design of the Bernal Park, the design of the Alviso Adobe, and a number of others. I won't bore you with a long list. And also at the state level, I got involved with helping craft other legislation that had to do with the environment. But after the Park and Recreation Commission in 2005...
Yeah, you don't have to go through the whole history of your bio right now, because we know you.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
I mean, what I'm looking for is your policy issues.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
Yeah.
And so what I'm primarily interested in right now is the fact that I've had 40 years in the private sector. I've had 26 of those were in leadership positions and senior management. And plus the government background, I think kind of uniquely qualifies me to lead Pleasanton going forward with some of the challenges I think that we have from a financial standpoint. Just recently I've been working with the Board of Directors of the League of California Cities on pension reforms and and some other issues that are related to finances, and I think that's the primary contribution that I can make to the city is help work through some of these financial issues. I'm also interested in things like affordable housing and transportation. We have the East Side plan that's coming up that I think we really need to dig into. And a number of other policy type issues that I'm particularly interested in, but I think where I can make my greatest contribution is in finances and pensions and things of that nature.
Okay, so I'm hearing 3 issues between the two of you right now. Transportation, affordable housing, pensions, maybe we'll call it fourth, pensions, which is a subset of a fourth, which is general overall finances. That sounds like a pretty good game plan. Let's start out with transportation. Okay. Oh, thank you.
We'll see how hot it gets in
Yeah,
here.
we'll see, right, you know.
Do you mind pouring me a glass of water? Thank you.
You talked about 84, State Route 84. I mean, I must admit, in my review of B1, I didn't look at where 84 came in on all this. I assume it's on the list somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether it's full funding for it or not. Do you remember offhand whether?
You know, I don't know that it's full funding. What I do know is that Measure B1 puts it higher on the list, and the advantage to the way the legislation is written this time is that even though the tax is voted on once, the expenditure plan has to go before the voters every 20 years. The problem for East County prior to this is that we would vote for the tax, we would pay the tax, which we will do even if Pleasanton votes against it. If the rest of the county votes for it, we're still going to pay the tax. But in this particular case, we know exactly what projects are going to be built in East County. Prior to that, those could be moved around sort of at will, depending on the political environment or relationship. In this particular case, with this expenditure plan, you have it's not absolutely set in stone, but it certainly is a commitment that if the voters vote on that, that's the way it's going to be. So it is further up on the list. In addition to that, in 2006, when I was the person that came out in favor of Stone Ridge Drive, one of my conversations with Scott Haggerty was, if Stone Ridge Drive goes through, that he will support building 84 sooner rather than later. And I'm holding him to that, because I think that's extremely important in terms of taking traffic off of
So should I assume you are a supporter of B1?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, not only was I a supporter of putting on the ballot, because I think that was a pro forma vote for the council. They came to us and didn't ask us whether we agreed with the tax or not, but whether we'd support putting it on the ballot. I think it's a perpetual tax for a problem that is perpetual. And you can repeal taxes the same way that you put them on the ballot. And in addition, they're still coming forward every 20 years with a list of projects that can be validated or not by the voters.
Jerry, where are you on B1?
I opposed it.
And because?
Because it did not have a sunset clause in it, and I have seen Highway 84 go up and down the priority list, both at TVTC, MTC, and with the triangle study. And when this thing comes back, all you're going to get to do is, in 20 years, is look at the projects. You're not going to get to look at whether or not you approve the tax. So I was opposed to putting it on the ballot without a sunset clause in it. With the sunset clause, that'll give us an opportunity to see what has actually been done and decide whether or not we want to continue the tax with what they say they want to do going forward.
Can I get a clarification? You've both said 20 years. Would you tell me what year that is?
For 20 years from now? Well, if it's approved this year, it'd be 2022.
Well, that'd be 10 years from now.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, 2032, yeah. I'm not a math teacher. But what you're approving in this is a package, so you're approving...
Clarification,
I'm
folks.
sorry.
The 20 years is from 2022. So the actual 20 years, as I understand it, is 2042. And the reason for that is it was 2022 that the old one was going to expire.
You know, you're right about that.
So it's not 2032 that the voters get another look at this. It's 2042, 30 years from now, not 20 years from now.
You're right about that. I misspoke. And well,
I mean,
okay.
Yeah, okay. So this talk about 20 years, it's 30 years is what it really is. It's 20 years after that, but we'll all be dead by then. With all due respect to all of us, with one exception perhaps.
You know, and we are, though, with this package, approving a plan that's there too. So this is a new plan. So it's not, there is money being spent as part of this. Okay. So we get a shot this time, and you're right, the next time is 30 years. Okay,
so let me let you both, Jerry raised one of the issues I'd like you, since B1 has come up, and B1 is one of those things where you get a little something, everybody gets a little something, and we, as you probably know, look at it a little more globally. You know, can each of you explain to me your thoughts on, and you've answered part of this, A, the lack of sunset, and B, the doubling of the tax, and whether or not it's justified. Start with you, Cheryl.
Okay, well, first of all, it was a piece of legislation that allowed them to reauthorize the half cent and then extend it to a penny. The issue with, I think that, to be frank, they allowed it to go. What they
do is they double it now, and then they continue that doubling.
Correct.
Forever.
Correct. But if this goes down, it doesn't necessarily mean it will come back in the same form. It required a legislative action to allow them to extend it to another half cent. So the half cent they could put on the ballot. To be able to do it in this manner required legislative action. That's why the county supervisor. Excuse me. Yes, the state legislative action.
Okay,
so that's one thing. The second thing.
What is the relevance of that?
The relevance is that if this there's there's the policy issue of it, and then there's the political issue of it.
Yes.
I believe that the relevance has to do with the money and time it takes to go back and do this at the legislature, and the money and time that's gone into this to create the plan. Obviously, every city has had their hand, and I sit as an alternate on ACTC, and every city has had a hand in this. 12 months to 18 months of work, and then you're starting all over in a situation where we're already behind building.
But is that a justification for a policy decision?
No, let's look at the whole picture, okay? Because my job, it's as an individual, you can look at this and say, I don't like this, and I don't want to vote for it for this reason. As a mayor, you have to look out to see what the ultimate decision is going to do for your city. So, first of all, I support the transportation projects that are on this. Is this the best possible way? Would I'd like to have seen it differently? Maybe. But even having looked at this, I support all the projects on here. I like the way the conversation happened. I would have liked to have seen more for East County. But as it is, the kinds of things that we have said as a council were council priorities in Pleasanton are on this list. And they're committed, and that means a lot.
Do you think your constituents, city constituents that is, would approve of the doubling and the permanency of it?
I think that some will, some won't, and I was about to get to that portion of it.
I mean, because you talked about representing your constituents.
Right,
Okay.
and doing what's best for Pleasanton.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, do you want a doubling of tax, they're going to say no. If you tell them it's going to save them hours on the freeway because State Route 84 is going to be built, that might be a different conversation. It depends on how you couch the question. Everybody you talk to wants State Route 84 built. Well, if you want it built, you have to have the funding to do it, and this is the funding. So if you, in isolation, say this is a doubling of taxes and you approve it, everybody would say no. If you then explain what you get for that tax and what it might do to your community in terms of eliminating the traffic going down First Street, then you're now having to do a cost-benefit analysis.
But isn't that the same cost-benefit analysis they asked the voters to do 10 years ago to get the first half cent? I mean, isn't that exactly the argument we made 10 years ago?
Okay, the difference to me here is the commitment to doing this and to having the money and to seeing right here.
So the difference is just 84 for you?
Well, the difference is 84. The difference is local streets that we have been paying to be, the potholes filled and covered.
Haven't you been getting local money?
We get some, but this is, let me give you an example of where this makes a difference. Wheels has been cut down to 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
That's our Parrot Transit,
right.
for elderly. With this, it goes from $400,000 to $670,000 for people in this community. If you ask
what does that mean for service?
It will increase the number of days that the service is available.
Okay, from what to what?
It's just been cut back to 2. I would hope that it would go back to 5. I don't, I can't say for sure it's going back to 5, but it would certainly, it's another almost a third more in funding than we're having right now. But also, let me also speak to the political aspect.
So it would go from 2 days to how many days?
We were at 5, we've gone down to 2.
And how many would you go back to?
I would hope to 5, maybe
okay.
4.5, with the funding, if I'm doing my math correctly.
Okay.
But here's the political aspect of this. This tax could pass if Pleasanton doesn't vote for it at all.
Yes.
Okay, and so we have to, even though my constituents may not want a doubling of taxing, if you look at that compared to what's going on in the rest of the county and the likelihood of this passing or not, we want to make sure that we maintain those relationships where we get the attention that we deserve. And we have spent a lot of time in conflict with people on whom we have to beg for money, basically.
Okay, well, can you address the lack of a sunset?
I think that is an issue for people. I think that
what about for you?
For me, I cannot imagine a time that we're not going to need that transportation money. I cannot imagine a time, and it was solved for me by the ability to be able to vote for the projects themselves and the fact that they were actually in a queue ready to go. And the fact that in California, you can put something on the ballot and pass it, and you can put something on the ballot and take it away, which Howard Jarvis did with Prop 13. So if you're unhappy with the tax and you find that it's not being applied, this is an agency that has done things early, on time, and under budget. And so if you don't like what you're seeing, if it looks like it's being abused, the citizens can go back and
Can
take
you
it.
name me one tax that's been taken away? Locally?
Prop 13.
Locally.
Locally. Well, we don't pass local taxes. Taxes are passed through the county and through the state. We don't pass.
Okay, below the state level.
Excuse me, we do.
Below the state level.
Below
You
the
just
state
said
level.
you could take it away. Can you name me one example?
Well,
in which that is
property taxes were reduced.
Below the
below the
state was?
I don't know of one.
Okay. Jared?
Yeah, so, it's not a matter of whether or not that I support these projects. Obviously, I do support Highway 84 and the other projects that are in this thing. It's the problem that I have with it, and the problem that I think most of my constituents have with it, is that it is a perpetual tax, and it does not have a sunset clause in it. And that's what I hear over and over and over and over, is that you don't trust the voters to make the decision in whatever number of years you might decide to put the sunset clause in for. And that we want to take a look and see what's been done before we reauthorize the tax.
Would you address, though, there are two issues that are here. There's the sunset, there's the doubling.
The doubling, that just came up this morning after we had our meeting this morning. It was mentioned to me that the doubling of this thing is not acceptable. And this is, I'm sure, is going to be
mentioned to you what this morning.
we were at a debate this morning.
Okay. The doubling is not new information.
Yeah, it's not new information, but I've just heard this from constituents just as early as today, that the doubling of the tax is just not acceptable. I mean,
what's your feeling?
My feeling is that, just to be very honest with you, I'm not going to really support a tax like this. Now, don't get me wrong. If they go back and come back with a Measure B that has a sunset clause in it, I will probably support it.
Even if it's doubling?
Even if it's doubling.
Okay.
Because these projects are that valuable to this region.
Okay. So your problem was with this lack of sunset, not with the doubling per se.
And the fact that it is a perpetual tax.
Well, that's what lack of sunset, right, yeah, right.
And to get to the policy part of this, again, as an individual, that's very uncomfortable to hear that. As in a reality, if you're looking at the policy that's being made by Alameda County and the practical political arena that is likely to pass, to openly oppose putting it on the ballot to be voted on puts us in a very untenable political situation in terms of a council. The only two council members in the entire county that voted no were on the Pleasanton City Council. We were, if not the last city, the second.
Who voted no?
Cindy and Jerry. If we were not the last city to go, we were certainly the second to the last city to go. It was a pro forma vote. So if you're looking in terms of how you're going to strategize to get what you need for a city, that really put us in a conflict with the County Board of Supervisors, but also a number of other commissions and
Help me
committees.
understand.
Right.
Your representative voted no, yet you still got in here. You're saying you still get in here what you want. So what's the problem? What's the problem with voting your conscience here?
We have people. Okay, first of all, the vote was to put it on the ballot, and all tax measures go on the ballot. You could have simply said, "I'm opposed to the tax itself because it's a tax in perpetuity."
Yeah, no, but you're saying if that you need to go along to get along, essentially.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. But if you have two members of a council, for example, that have voted no on something, and they sit on a committee where the entire set of funding, like Wheels, comes from Measure B, you're automatically sitting with two people who are not likely to cooperate with the projects that are being put forth. Now, that's the political reality of the situation.
So are you saying just because Jerry and Cindy voted no, that if the voters approve it, they're not going to cooperate on the funding? I'm not quite sure what you're saying.
I think that there's an issue there. I think that that's what I'm hearing, not just from, we obviously have two different sets of constituents, because what he's hearing from his constituents.
No, yeah, but I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. Not what your constituents are saying.
Okay, I am telling you that we have.
What I'm reading into what you're saying is that by voting no, Cindy and Jerry set themselves up to have to vote no or to oppose projects in the future or something. It's not like you didn't get what you wanted. You're arguing that what you wanted is in there anyhow.
Right. No, and I understand what you're
So
saying.
I'm trying to understand.
I am telling you that in a political arena, that we have a reputation in Pleasanton as not working well with others outside our jurisdiction. That's not the same thing as standing up for Pleasanton. You can stand up for what you need and what you want and still try to be cooperative in order to move the county forward. We're part of the county. We're not an isolated community with a moat around us. And if you hear some people in Pleasanton will say, we're trying to build a wall. And it's gotten us in trouble in a number of venues.
How did it get you in trouble here?
In this particular, in this particular case, I'm speculating based on what I'm hearing. In other cases, I'll give you an example on affordable housing. We didn't follow our arena numbers. We actually sent a letter from our council to the state, basically saying other communities could take care of our arena numbers. That is a perceived.
Well, we'll come to that, but
okay.
we're talking transportation.
Okay. Right.
I mean, I don't see what the problem. The other is a legal problem that has consequences.
Right.
This is a political vote on a policy issue.
Correct.
And I'm trying to understand. If Jerry and Cindy thought that this was, as obviously we did editorially too, that this was a problematic tax. What I hear you saying is even if they thought it was a problematic tax, they should have voted for it.
They should have voted to put it on the ballot. I don't care whether they vote for it or not. That's a conscience issue. That's a conscience issue.
Well,
but the question before the council wasn't whether
that's a political issue to vote for because then it's touted as every city voted to put it on the ballot.
You could have very easily said that I don't believe in taxes in perpetuity, but I believe that the citizens have the right to vote on it.
Then you give away your leverage to try and negotiate something that
Well, it's very hard to negotiate something when you're two people out of an entire county.
Okay,
I mean, there's not much leverage there, and so I understand what you're saying, and I understand why a tax in perpetuity is a problem. But the issue here is a sense of how to strategize to get the things that you believe that you need for your city. Okay. And these are the things on this list are part of the council priorities from the day that I was sworn in as a council member, that we said we would work toward having these things. So whereas you, as an editor, can take a strong position one way or the other, as a council member.
We would never do that.
Well, and the thing is, an individual, I can do that.
Yeah.
But as a council member, my job is to figure out where that gray area is so I can maintain the integrity of the city, stand up for the things where we have a staunch line on it, but also get the stuff that we need. And that's a very different skill set than an editor who can take a position and not have to deal with the responsibility of applying the decision or the responsibility of not having the money at the end of it.
Let me ask you the next question. You raised affordable housing. So help me out, both of you, on where you guys are at. We started to ask this a second ago, but what's the next step and what should happen here? Because obviously you guys did lose the suit, so Cheryl, what's the next step, and where, where do you think the city should be going on this?
Where do I think this should be going on? Well, we're in the process of finishing up the housing element and approving design guidelines, which was part of the settlement agreement. There's we've been back and forth with HCD and Urban Habitat in terms of whether or not the units that are on these properties that we rezoned, whether or not they should be by right zoning, which we are uniform in our opposition to that. It's very important in my mind.
By right zoning.
Which means that once you zone it, an applicant that comes in that says 30 to an acre, you have to let them do it no matter what. That's by right zoning. Okay. Yeah. We would like to have some kind of design guidelines so that we could pay attention to the quality of the property or the units that are built.
Is that a sticking point with the state?
We think that we've resolved it at this point.
Okay.
We think that we've resolved it. Part of it is that we've set up some general design guidelines.
Tell you what, let me ask you, rather than going through the minutia of this, is there a significant difference between the two of you on what should happen here? Because you kind of know where each other's at, I assume, since you've been sitting on the same
Now, I can just,
council.
just tell you that I think we have to comply with the court's order because we lost, and I think we have a good program in place to move forward with. I think the design guidelines are going to be quite helpful in making sure that we get a high quality product, and that was the most important thing for me. Since we lost the suit, then we have to provide a high quality product that I think people who work here would like to live in. And yet we still have the inclusionary, affordable element to it that we can have people that are low and very low income.
Cheryl, do you agree with that?
I think that, for the most part, yes. I think one of the issues with the inclusionary, and I do agree that inclusionary is the best way to deal with it, but I think the trade-off with inclusionary is you have to build more units.
Okay, explain to me what we mean by inclusionary.
Okay, there's an inclusionary zoning ordinance that says 15% of any housing unit development has to have a certain number of moderately low, low, or very low housing units, and of course this ends up being subsidized by the developer.
Yeah.
And
low, very low, moderately low, and very low.
Moderately low, low, and very low. And the moderately low base.
Excuse me.
The moderately low base is what I had said to you that was 80%. Of the median income, which is high in Pleasanton. It's about $12,000 higher than the median.
So inclusionary says that you have to have and so what's the issue?
Okay, so the issue is that in order to solve the problem of meeting the RENA numbers, which tells us how many units have to be in each of those categories, with a 15% inclusionary zoning ordinance, you have to build more houses to match those RENA numbers. Now, obviously, we're not in the business of building houses or units. That we zone for them, and
to meet the affordable housing guidelines.
Correct. And then somebody comes in with a plan, and we approve it or not.
Okay. So what's the issue here? You do or don't want inclusionary zoning?
I think inclusionary zoning is better. The trade-off is you need more units.
Okay.
Let me say, for example, if you did a mixed level community where you had single-family homes, duets, and high density in the same area, and actually included more moderately low, low, or very low housing in that mix where they share the same amenities, we wouldn't have to build as many housing units as we do now based on our inclusionary zoning ordinance. Now, whether or not that's a politically feasible position to take, it will take some creativity on the part of the council in the next 20 years or so to be able to determine whether we want really high density everywhere to accommodate those numbers, or whether we want to be creative and look at some other models that we're seeing throughout the country that might reduce the number of total units, but you include them in a different way than the 15%.
Do you have any problems with this inclusionary zoning?
No.
Do you disagree with, is there a disagreement here?
I don't want to overblow the inclusionary thing. That's an absolute minimum when we build these units. If someone came in with a project that had more, for example, if a nonprofit developer came in and wanted to build something with more affordable units, certainly we would want to look at that very carefully. But yeah, I do agree that the inclusionary model is the best model to go with, because, and at the end of the day, I think that's the one we'll probably wind up going with on some projects, but not all. But that's only a minimum. As for example, I saw some projects in New Orleans where they're in 9th Ward, where they're building, or 4th Ward, where they're building some new units where they have all mixes.
Okay, so is there a difference here between the two here?
I don't think there's a significant difference.
Okay, I want to isolate differences, not because I think voters want to understand what the difference. Okay.
I mean, honestly, I think the significant difference between the two of us, if you look at our records, if I may be so bold as to suggest it, is a leadership style and relationships outside the community. I mean, I think there's a real difference. I'll give you an example.
I want to stick with policy, actually.
Okay.
I'm not going to go there. Style is not kind of the thing, usually. You guys both are elected officials who can, I mean, frankly, I come into this with the thinking you both can lead. You've both served. You may have different styles. That kind of is a personality sort of thing. I'm much more interested in the policy differences.
Well, and this is a policy issue. So one of the things that we both do is that we pay attention to what's going on in the state. And there's 2 or 3 ways you could do that. You could do it through advocacy organizations like California League of Cities, Chamber of Commerce, Urban Habitat, whatever. Or you can do it directly with the legislators themselves. We had an issue in 2007 or so that had to do with affordable housing in areas dealing with seniors. Very good bill, but it was going through the House floor, and there was unintended consequences that was going to mess up our HUD certification. And Nelson calls me on the phone and he said, "Do you know anybody?" They were literally debating it on the floor. Picked up the phone, called somebody, they answered the phone. We've got to have the phone number, number 1. Number 2, they have to answer. And number 3, they have to be willing to talk to you. And in that case, I literally sat there with the landline on my shoulder, texting the changes of the bill to a legislative assistant as the bill was being heard on the floor. Those kinds of connections are very important with policy issues to deal with Pleasanton. And we've had a situation, and Jerry and I were both horrified about this. A bill went through the legislature and they called it the Pleasanton Plan. If that's not offensive, I don't know what is. And it was aimed at communities like ours that were affluent, that didn't have the kind of affordable housing the state thought we needed. But we were being battered all over the place because of our position in the community and the affluence in this area and the lack of affordable housing. We need that kind of relationship with Sacramento for those policy issues that you're talking about.
Okay, let's go to pensions.
Okay?
You guys have made some changes. You've set some goals. Are you there?
No.
What needs to be done next, Cheryl?
I think that, that to some degree, that's an answer that's going to be answered as the state moves forward. I think that the benchmarks that we have set, the idea that we're trying to reduce our unfunded liability by 10%, through the city is an excellent benchmark. But we also know through our actuarial consultant that we could do everything and it'll have impact negatively, that we'll still have a hole because of the market, or we can do nothing, and if the market turns, it could improve.
So what are the things you could do right now?
Well, we just did.
Or what might you do in the future?
Well, we're on 2-tier, which I believe is the, I don't know any other city that's done that, and we did that before.
That's gone 2-tier?
That's gone 2-tier.
Oh,
I don't know.
many cities
Many
have
cities
gone
have? Okay, but I didn't know that.
Yeah. Don't pound your chest on that one. Yeah.
I don't think this is an issue where anybody can pound their chest.
Yeah.
It is such a mess that
I agree.
we are working as hard as we possibly can, recognizing that every time we turn around, we're asking existing employees to take a cut and work harder because we have to, because we have to pay our bills. So if we have market value $176 million unfunded liability, I'm willing to talk about anything that we could do to reduce that. So, we've reduced medical, we've reduced retiring medical, we have changed the age of retirement for new hires, we have negotiated full EPMC for safety personnel. And I know in other jurisdictions they've negotiated more than EPMC, which the state now is saying that new hires are going to go 50-50. Those are all things that'll happen.
Well, actually, what you've negotiated is no EPMC.
Right, correct.
Because they're actually picking up their share now.
Well, and I would also go so far as to say that, the woulda, coulda, shouldas with the contract, but I've been in a contract construction committee in a bargaining team. No way in the world would I thought that would have been okay, that there wasn't some trigger that as soon as the market changed, that the employees would have started to pick up the difference. That would have solved the burden that we're seeing now. Because
you lost me, I'm sorry.
Okay. When this was negotiated, and the city chose to pick up the entire EPMC.
I see. Okay.
They did that because it saved payroll taxes.
I got you.
If there was a trigger in that said when the market turns or when things get bad, you will share the burden in this, we would have never been in this mess. So now we're having to figure out, we've learned something from that, obviously. We're having to figure out how to turn back the clock and get people on a different track. The benefit may be that we'll see a good portion of retirees in the next 10 years, which will allow us to hire people at less money and save our budget in that manner. But I don't know what else we can do other than negotiate more of a contribution from employees. I think that we have to look at what the state is doing. We can't. The California State Supreme Court says that you cannot negotiate vested pension rights without offering some other kind of advantage in return. And so if we are creative in terms of how we look at those
Since you're not on the verge of bankruptcy, since like a few, I don't see that you have, unless some case law comes along that changes that, a lot of out. I would agree with that.
Yeah. And so we then start
Since
to
you're
look
not
at
Stockton.
and nor are we Vallejo.
Yeah.
But I think it also, there's ways to look at things that are beneficial to working conditions that have a minimal or a non-monetary value in exchange for more contribution to pensions.
Okay, so what would you advocate more contributions to pensions?
Not without a balance. Let me give you an example. Fire. They've gone from 4 people to 3. We've reduced, from in the fire
in one
station.
station, right?
In one station, for the whole Livermore Pleasanton, it's more than that.
Yeah, but for your side of it, as I understand it.
I think
you
there's 2
reduced-
of them. I
okay.
think there's one recently, but I think there was one that
Okay.
was 3-person before. Here's the problem with that.
Mhm.
People don't realize, okay, that's a good savings. But the fire department has something called 2 in, 2 out. And so if they come to your house and you have a
I know the drill.
Okay. And so, what could have been a small fire becomes a large fire because we have 3 people. Well, the community chooses whether or not that's a risk that they want to take
Right.
in the long run. And that may be a risk that we're fine with. But it's those kinds of things to consider. There's working conditions.
Okay, but I don't understand how that plays into the question of whether greater employee contribution should be on the table.
Staffing a fire station in a different way.
But that's not a.
That's a working
That's not
condition.
commensurate benefit.
I don't think it's always commensurate. It didn't say commensurate. It said an advantage. And since it's collective bargaining, if the employees believe it's an advantage, whether it's non-monetary or monetary, it doesn't have to be. It's not ever going to be commensurate. Where are we going to find that kind
What
of
about
money?
with your miscellaneous? What should you do?
What did we do with our miscellaneous?
What should you do with yours?
Well, they need to go to full EPMC for sure. But keep in mind.
Full employee contribution.
Correct.
Okay. Which would be no EPMC.
Right.
Okay.
Matter of language, I think, is the way we've been couching
Okay.
it. I think that the other thing to remember about miscellaneous employees is that with the contract issue that we had a couple of years ago when we went back on the tentative agreement, the savings in that contract was only $170,000. The cost savings for miscellaneous employees doing these kinds of strategies are not nearly the cost savings that we see when we do it with managers and we do it with safety personnel.
Well, safety personnel, I understand. Truly not the case overall for managers?
I'm sorry?
Well, okay.
I mean, if you're talking about somebody making $200,000 a year,
Right,
that's
but
significant.
if you're proportionally trying to move
Right,
the
well,
whole
if
budget.
there's proportionally, you're correct,
Right.
But I am also a firm believer that if you are
I mean,
doing-
I assume if whatever changes you propose or not impose, you come up with for miscellaneous, will carry over to your managers.
Our
right?
managers have already been paying full.
So
They went first, and that was my other thing, is that we have had good role modeling in Pleasanton. They didn't ask anybody to do it before they did it themselves.
Jerry.
Yeah, basically, I don't think we're finished, and I think that they're both at the state level and local level. There needs to be some continuing dialogue on some of the things that we can do. Certainly at the state level, I think they have to give us a little bit more leverage on what we can do.
Such as?
And I think there are some cases where we might even take a look at lowering the cap on personable income and actually offering a defined contribution plan. But I think we need to get into, and we need to have some serious discussions about defined contribution. I mean, I recall I went to defined contribution in 1979. So it's defined benefits are something that's just absolutely non-existent almost today, and as far as I can tell, in corporate America. But I don't think we can depend on the market going up and going through the roof in order to solve our unfunded liability problems.
No, nor do I. I think I'd also mention that the one stark difference between a government institution like a city and a corporation is that our job is service, that they're service providers. And some, think, well, they're a consumer of tax dollars. They're also payers of tax dollars. And so one of the things I think that if we did move into an area where we were at risk in terms of bankruptcy or not having a balanced budget, this idea of having people weigh in, what services do you want to do without? Because I think it's unreasonable to reduce someone's salary significantly over time and not recognize that there's also going to be an accompanying reduction of services.
Okay, so let me ask you guys we'll make it the last question, but the mile high question on pensions and retirement benefits, health benefits. You have $176 million unfunded liability, as you say. That represents scale. How do you scale that? How do you explain $176 million represents
Okay.
to people? Let's start there, and then I'll go.
Do you want to go first? Or you want me?
Well, what it means is that the market fluctuations have just gone through. Well, like for this year, they actually had a 1.1% return, and they had projected a 7.5% return.
And last year they would have counter-argued they got 12.
Well, I mean, that was only 1 year out of what? I mean, it's...
They would argue that over the last 20 they got 7.8 or 7.7.
Well, that's a good argument, but I think what's happening...
Yeah, over the last 10 they only got 5.6 too, so yeah.
What's happening is over the last few years we've been putting more people into the retired pool as well. And we've been letting people retire earlier, and we're living longer, so we're getting a bigger number of people in the retired pool. So I think it's going to be tougher to bring that unfunded liability down than it was going up, simply because of that. I really think we have to look at some alternatives. I'm just convinced that the way we're going now of fully having defined programs like this or defined benefit programs like this is that they're just not going to be sustainable.
I think there's a couple of, do you want to type or you want me to?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay. All right. I think there's a couple of things, the ways to look at this.
I'm good at multitasking.
Yeah, I understand. I do it often myself. I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. $176 million is huge. And part of the reason that it looks different is that it's being calculated differently. That's not to say that it shouldn't be calculated like this. I think it's important to know how much you actually
calculate.
Well, we're talking about, we're doing actuarial, we're doing market. People are confused about what that really means.
Well, what do you understand that number is?
Well, I think you have to look at the market aspect of it simply because I think you have to look at the worst case scenario. If it turns out to be different, then that's great. But I think you have to look at the worst it possibly could be and plan for that. But it's also not something.
Well, what do you? The 176. Do you think that's market value or actuarial value?
That's market value.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so the 176 million is not payable tomorrow. It's paid over time, similar to your mortgage. The thing with the mortgage is you want to make sure you're paying your principal and your interest, and you want to make sure that if you have a balloon payment, you're not getting behind. This is similar to a balloon payment. Is we're trying to make what we're doing now is the hole is not getting as bad. We're not making it as deep. We're not solving the problem, and we know that. But you asked about scale, and I think that lots of times when you talk in the millions of dollars, it would make me crazy to think I owed that much money. But let's look at something that we've done in Pleasanton. $419 million is what we borrowed to build Hacienda Business Park. We paid it off in 13 years. So if you look at that and you think of that as a scale, in a city, you're used to dealing with millions of dollars at a time. It's approximately 2 years of our general budget. So
and you paid Hacienda off
in 13 years.
And how'd you pay it off?
Bonds and loans and other things.
Wait a minute, you borrowed $419 million. How'd you pay off that for? Bonds would be borrowing to pay off borrowing.
Yes.
So how'd you pay off the 419?
I don't have the details exactly how it was paid off, other than the city paid that off in terms of infrastructure.
Okay.
And again, one of the reasons I asked that question is I was looking for some way to scale what $176 million meant to the city.
Jerry, do you want to scale it? Give it a scale. How do you see it as a scale?
Well, by the way, the actuarial number of 130 million is a big number too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
and you know, I haven't really thought about how you.
Did somebody give you guys these numbers recently?
No.
Okay. I just.
We have been living and
Okay.
breathing and
Okay.
eating this for
Okay.
2 years.
just
I mean,
curious.
I went.
Okay. Okay,
I
so
mean-
go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to tell you that we scale the thing. I just think if you probably take a look and divide that by the number of people that live in Pleasanton, I haven't done that right now, but it would give you some kind of scale as to what each person might owe if we had to pay that.
Dan,
How many people live in Pleasanton?
70,000.
Okay, so let's do that real quick math here. Okay? Because I'm always the one who likes 176, 123, divided by 123. Yes.
You want me to do that in my head?
I mean, you guys have any sense of scale of what that works out to?
176, what is that,
I'm sorry, this is
4
not a fair
million?
question.
I mean,
It's $2,500 a person.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
So, but.
The good news is you're half what I just calculated for Richmond, almost exactly per capita, but go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, if you were coming into an interview with you, what do you think you would study before you got here?
Okay, thank you.
Really?
I'm glad the message is getting out.
So if somebody was
Yeah.
doing their homework, it would be
Okay.
crazy to come in here unprepared for that.
Okay, so let me just,
Yeah, I've been living this too with the league.
Yeah.
I just got back from a league conference.
well, let me
Well,
just,
and we've just bargained 3 contracts. I mean, we've had to have these numbers in our head constantly in terms of understanding what this meant.
Jerry, you want to talk about, or respond to Cheryl, Cheryl says similar to mortgage and compared it to hacienda. Do you think that's a good comparison?
Well, no, because I think hacienda was being built for the purpose of putting businesses in there that are gonna pay taxes, and I'm not sure how we got it all back, but I'm sure the businesses that went into Hacienda Business Park had something to do with that.
You know, I would differ in that, again, because you're dealing with corporations and governments are providers of service, and I think it's a mistake not to look at your employees as assets. And so, and the fact that your employees are also taxpayers, and that they all don't think the same in terms of.
So it's a mistake not to look at employees as assets?
Correct.
Okay.
I think, well, if you want to say it in
Okay.
the affirmative, employees are assets, and that's an investment in the quality of employees that we have in any community.
Okay.
Now, I can tell you that I have managed service organizations where the people were the service. And I have never had more than 65% of my total revenues go for wages, salaries, and benefits.
Let me ask both of you a question then. Sure, starting with you, Cheryl. Cheryl, what does the unfunded liability represent?
A huge problem.
No,
No,
but
I
what
mean,
is, define it?
Define it, it's money we owe
For what?
for a contract we had promised employees. These are people that, in the same sense that you will get Social Security. This was their retirement.
Do you think it's comparable with Social Security, analogous to Social Security in the way it's funded?
Do I think no?
What's the difference?
I don't think we had the money and borrowed it. I think in Social Security, we have seen the federal government have a pot of money and they borrowed from that money for whatever purpose and sent it out. I think that a part of the situation that we're in now was that we lost money in investments as a state, as did many people during this recession. So I don't think it was money that we had that we spent poorly. I think it's money that we promised that we don't have.
Jerry, do you see
I
a
think
difference?
that's not totally inaccurate. It's you know, when you look at this, the normal cost is just what it takes to pay the
Going forward, yes.
Yeah. And the unfunded part of that is the fluctuations in the market.
The unfunded is not a part of the normal cost. The
Well, yeah,
unfunded
it's
is a
part of the
separate.
normal cost.
It's
No,
now,
not.
but it didn't be.
No, it's not. The normal cost is a separate part of your payment in your unfunded liability. Go
That's a
ahead.
fluctuation that you see. And I've forgotten the question.
Well, she says it's analogous to Social Security.
I don't think I said analogous.
Okay.
No, I don't think it's analogous.
I'm sorry, the question I asked was, what is defining unfunded liability?
And it's the fluctuations that you see, not the cost is not normal cost. It's what you see as a result of the market fluctuations and the investments and what have you, and it's either the shortfall or the windfall of what happens in the market. Theoretically, if you paid normal cost all the way along and for over a number of years, theoretically, then you would catch up. But I just don't believe that's going to happen because we have more people in the retirement pool and we're putting more in every day because people are living longer.
I wasn't thinking of normal in the sense that you were using it, but yeah. And I think that, and the other thing about pensions that I think are so difficult is that there are so many unknown factors. I mean, we can speculate how many people will actually benefit from it, but we don't know that to be true until it happens.
Here's the difference. Why your analogy is you're wrong, is wrong.
I
And
didn't use
why
it
the
as a-
mortgage?
I
Why,
didn't-
okay, why mortgage is wrong?
Okay.
First of all, your pension payments have two parts. You have your normal cost, and then you have the amortized payment on your unfunded liability. Okay, so if you look at your COPS, for example, might be your total payment might be 40 cents on the dollar, 30 of it, and this is pretty typical of what CalPERS is, but it may not be your numbers. Okay, it might be 30 cents is the normal cost. That is the going forward cost to pay for the service that is the additional pension benefits that are being earned in that year. So that's this amount that should be set aside to earn interest so that there's sufficient funds in the future to pay for the benefit, the additional marginal benefits that were earned that year. If you fall short and you're not keeping up, you have an unfunded liability. What do they do with that unfunded liability? They treat it like a credit card balance. And I'm not saying mortgage balance deliberately. You'll see why in a second. And so what they do is they amortize it, in CalPERS case, mostly over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basically making a payment over 30 years on a credit card debt. Okay? Now, what's the important part about this and why it's not like a mortgage? When you go out and take out a mortgage, it's for a building.
Yes.
It has an asset, okay? The normal cost you were paying was for a labor cost, for labor services that were earned and provided that year.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the future.
Oh, I get what you're
It
saying.
has no future value. It's for, and if you fall short and you have the unfunded liability, that's a debt for past service. So, the analogy I use in the presentation I give on this is, it's like charging last night's steak dinner, if you want, on your home mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Has no future value.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in the future is going to benefit from it. There's no structure. There's no equity behind it. It's gone. Okay? So it's not a mortgage. The analogy of like a mortgage, and hence when you use hacienda, I would argue it's a horrible analogy for that reason. Okay? It's a past debt. So what we're doing with that unfunded liability by traipsing it out over the future, what we're doing is we're making future generations pay for past labor costs. We wouldn't make them pay for past salary costs. Why is it any more justified to make them pay for past pension costs? Because they're in the past that they were earned. It's for past labor.
That makes sense to me, but I have one question for
Sure.
you. All right, so you put that money, to what we normally do when we put the stuff away is we put it and we invest it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you put it in a money market, whatever we do with it, earning so much interest.
Yeah, well, what CalPERS
Okay.
does is it puts it in all
Right,
sorts
okay.
of
All right,
things,
so
yeah.
say that so if
Yeah.
we had done that, right? That 30% or whatever it was or is or going to be.
If you invested your normal costs.
If we had paid along as we go and the market had tanked, where would we be now?
The market did tank.
Right, and we're in the same boat. So how do you adjust for that?
How you adjust for that
right.
is part your problem, part CalPERS's problem.
Right, exactly.
Okay, in the sense that CalPERS has been making this assumption all along. And you guys appreciate this more than most cities, I must say. CalPERS is making this assumption all along that they can get 7.5, or back then it was 8, I believe, % return on their investments. And they never thought the possibility that the market could tank.
Right.
There are others who say, maybe that's not the case. Well, today going forward, they're still saying 7.5. They're still acting as if we'll never have another tank. They're still acting as if, for the most part, past performance is an indicator of what we're going to have in the future. Now, how can you guard against that?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
No, well, you guys know the answer. How you can guard against that? How can you guard against that?
How can we guard against CalPERS making bad decisions?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, you go to the state and you change the CalPERS
No,
formula.
there's another thing you can do.
Right. Go to another system.
No, there's another thing you can do.
We're playing 20 questions
Okay.
now? Okay.
You guys have a great actuary. You can bring them in, you can say, rerun the numbers and make more realistic assumptions, or more conservative assumptions. And let's work off those numbers instead. So rather than putting in based on, a rate of return that by their own numbers, by the way, only has a 50-50 chance of them achieving it. Because if you look at CalPERS' own numbers, the chances of them, by their own projections, of hitting 7.5 are at best even odds.
Well,
okay? If what you can say is, we don't like those odds. Okay? Give us a number that's more realistic. CalPERS won't do it for you, but Bartel will do it for you, right? And you could be making your contributions into the system based on that instead. If you end up further down the line and CalPERS turns out to be right, you're ahead of the game. So.
Well, and we are putting more money in than we are.
Well, you're putting a little bit more. Yeah, and I give you guys and Nelson a lot of credit for at least seeing that and starting to pay down your unfunded line.
Well,
you guys are a leader in that.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the things that you're saying about this, but it is the problem that we're having in terms of dealing with state. If you look at the investment pattern over the last decade, this will still just be a blip. Maybe it'll go down, maybe it'll go up.
This will be a blip. What'll be a blip?
This recession will be a blip, just like if you look at the 100 years. If you
won't
look
be
at
a blip.
If you look at the Depression.
It won't be a blip.
Okay. If you look at we can.
The market's not going to get you out of this.
No, I didn't. That's not what I'm saying. You're reading into what I'm saying.
Okay,
you're reading into what I'm saying.
Enough.
If you go back and you look at this, and it's that whole story that it's a recession when your neighbor's out of work, it's a depression when you're out of work. I mean, obviously, it's how it affects you individually.
Right.
But if you look at the Great Depression over the course of 100 years, it looks like a blip. It doesn't mean that it didn't affect that 30 years profoundly by anybody who was operating in it, who lost their house, who lost their business, who starved to death. I understand that. But I mean, these market conditions are volatile always. And I agree that more needs to be done in terms of trying to pay this down.
Well, if over 100 years it averages out, maybe that's great. But the problem with that kind of time horizon is that's our great-great-great-grandchildren who will end up paying in the
How
meantime.
would you solve the problem? Other than the conservative, and I don't and I agree
well,
with
that's
you
how I solve the problem. If I was
is that you would
saying
use more conservative
I'd
numbers.
use more conservative numbers. I wouldn't rely on,
and
And by the way, CalPERS, if you look at the numbers based on their own past returns, the work that Joe Nation has done, they don't even have a 50-50 chance of hitting 7.5. They have a 50-50 chance of hitting 7.1. So in other words, the numbers they're using, the odds are better than even they won't make it. The odds are better than even that your unfunded liability is going to grow, not shrink in the future.
And that's what Bartel tells
us.
Yeah, that's what Bartel tells us. And I think that Pleasanton is in a situation where we can make that kind of impact because we're affluent and we've managed well, and I mean, almost.
And you have a city manager who gets this,
Right,
unlike
right,
a lot.
right,
Yeah.
right, and we're not spending money on things that we can't pay for and that sort of
I
thing.
only raised this little discussion because frankly, you guys do get this to a certain extent as a city, far more than a lot of cities, and you do have a city manager who's very sophisticated in thinking about this in a way that others haven't been, you know, and I commend you for that.
Well,
You know, I mean, I, you know, but don't feel like you're strictly at the mercy of the state. You guys do have options too. That was my point.
If that was an impression, I don't believe
Okay.
that we're strictly at the mercy of the state.
Yeah.
I think that we have been proactive,
Mhm.
and I think that one of the challenges that's going to be for Pleasanton in the next coming year is the fact that we are going to have a profoundly different council, whatever that happens to look like. And we've been a very stable council, even with the personality differences. I think I would assume Jerry would agree with me on this, that most of the time, we've been able to roll our sleeves up and get to work and get to, at least in the direction that we needed to go in. There's gonna be a real change in the next, it's gonna take
Well, you
something
have a
very
new
strong.
mayor.
New mayor,
And you've got,
Well, you have 3 new council members,
Yeah,
because
3.
one of us will vacate a spot.
that's true,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, that's true.
yeah, it's going to
That's
be
true. It is
profoundly
gonna be
different.
profoundly different.
And it's going to take somebody very strong
That's a
with
very
good
good point.
relationships.
That's a good point, Sharon.
So, and it's going to take a lot of work to get us to a position where we can roll up our sleeves and get to work, because my idea of a perfect council would be people that are from very different of opinion. I don't think it's of any benefit to have all of the same opinion on any council. And that you work together, everybody do their own homework, have good critical thinking skills, come to a decision that benefits the entire city, make a decision, and move on. And I seek out people with whom I've had disagreements in policy, because it doesn't do me any good to talk to only people with whom I agree. It's not what, I don't think that's I think a great leader will listen to everyone.
I forgot
And
to
I
ask
think
you-
our voters have pretty much given us a diversified council
Yeah, I
in
agree.
almost every election I can remember.
I meant to ask you both, what's the status on the Lynn project?
They're done.
They've walked away from it?
Now, the only caveat to that is, I don't know where we are in the appeal. The appeal is still moving forward.
There's still more?
It's the same appeal, it just hasn't gone anywhere yet. But they have pulled all of their applications from that property. In fact, as far as I understand, Mr. Tong has moved his offices outside of Pleasanton.
So they never came back with the scaled back plan that could have met your guidelines?
I think it got as far as the planning commission workshop, and they walked away from it.
Yeah, they had a preliminary plan.
They just didn't want to do it at that scale.
Well, no, I think they were concerned that it was gonna have too many conditions put on it, that they wouldn't be able to put it in there.
I think they just didn't want to. Personally, I think there was a group of people that didn't want anything up there that had Lynn name on it. And I think they were reacting to that also. So,
Well, it's been a long, contentious battle.
and it'll be their grandchildren that will try to develop.
Yeah,
that.
I suspect this isn't going to be the last time. I don't think that'll be the last time we hear about this property.
No, I don't think so either.
No.
I don't think that we will sit on a council that will see it though. I think, I really think they're done. I think,
That's interesting.
so.
Folks, thank you very much.